welcome to our first session. This session is on community resourcing and self-provision. I would like to start by saying that sometimes when we talk about the economy, we end up thinking that it's like something that is super like complicated or something that happens outside of us, because we see these things like GDP, you see on the news, like things are going bad, the cost of living crisis, and it's always something that is quite abstracted and something that removes communities and people from feeling like they can have an element of agency over how we shape our economic lives. And then, there's the whole thing about who's the expert. And you're an economic expert if you went to Oxford, if you work at the Bank of England, stuff like that, which is a very marginal experience of the world. And so when I was thinking about this session, I was thinking about how can we expand our idea of economics to one that is reflective of our community's experiences of the economy. And I always like to think of like how, much of economics is written from the colonizer, of conquering, of competing, of stealing, of pillaging. What would it look like if the economy was told from the people whose stories are completely like missing from our idea of economics? And I find that especially the experiences of Black people within the economy just go completely missing, because for a while we were commodities and we were traded and we were a tool of the economy as opposed to people who are experiencing the system. And so with this session, I was like, what is the story of the economy we can tell from our experiences as like Black people? And not only that, as people who are shaping local economies and like creating systems of care. And when I'm talking about economy for this session, I'm talking about it as ways in which we meet each other's needs and the relationships that we are holding and practicing that helps us to meet our collective needs. And those needs are food, housing, like resources, not just money, the energy we have, our health, our like spirits, and how can we expand that idea of like, how are we meeting those needs and who is doing that? So when I was putting this panel together, I was like, wow, so many brilliant people who are doing really great work in a different range of, meeting community needs. And I would really love to welcome our panel. Woo, panel! Yes! And these are people that I find really inspirational in the work that they do and the sort of legacies that they're creating for the future of like Black economic liberation and thought and practice. And so I'm gonna hand it to each of these speakers to introduce themselves a little bit. Maybe let's start with you, Tobi, and then walk this way.
I will take this. Hi, everyone. My name is Tobi. I am, I guess I don't want to say community organizer, but that kind of like is a part of what I do. I'm a birth and death doula, body worker, and sound healing practitioner. And I think Noni invited me to speak here with regards to the work I've been doing with Purple Rain Collective, which is a collective, which is not really a collective at the moment. It's more like an archival space that still serves the community and like sharing resources of Black and brown people all around the world. But when we first started, it was a space to sort of get together and think on what it would look like for us post-Brexit, how we can support each other, how we look after each other. So I'm happy to be here and be like on this panel with you all.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Makeda, and I'm all the way from sunny Bristol. And today I'm representing the African Connections Consortium. And we're a group of people who have come together to, rather like what Sister's just been saying, to ensure that our resources are allocated properly for people of colour, particularly people of African heritage, who have been discriminated and undermined. And we want to have a self-led project in the city, which looks at some different rules in terms of how we treat each other, has planet sustainability at the heart of its food security as well, education, health, a very holistic approach to providing something. So we're creating something called Zenzele Village, and I will tell you a bit more about it later.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Nigel Carter. I'm a member of Oxford Community Action. I'm here with my colleague Majid Amidi, who's a co-founder of Oxford Community Action, along with our colleague Hassan Sabri, who's not able to join us today. He's running our newly opened community cafe on the Cowley Road, the famous Cowley Road, which is where the Oxford Carnival. The carnival happens in Oxford on the Cowley Road, so it's kind of really exciting for us to have just last month, opened our community cafe on the Cowley Road, and it's a part of Oxford which is very sort of multi-ethnic. It's a very vibrant part of Oxford. Anyone that's been to Oxford and knows that part of Cowley, East Oxford, and it reflects the area, the geographical area reflects the work of Oxford Community Action in terms of the communities, diverse Black and racially minoritized communities that we work with. And so again, it's interesting for us to have been able to open the community cafe as a community-led cafe as part of a kind of a community hub for us and for the communities that we work with in Oxford. And it kind of flows out of the food redistribution service that we initiated at the start of the pandemic. And perhaps we'll get into a bit more discussion about that as part of this session.
Thank you so much. Like, just already hearing the first opening of things that you all do, I'm excited to get into it. So sometimes one thing that I saw, for example, like when the Black Panthers used to do like their community kitchens, one of their slogans was like, what's it called? Feeding, what's the word? Survival until revolution, pending revolution. And a lot of like the work that you're doing is like, you know, that survival work. And again, the idea of like self-help. And quite often, a lot of like the economic organizing of like Black and minoritized people is understood as self-help. And so I'm interested to hear about how do you define self-help or like mutual aid in the work that you are doing? And like within your communities, like what is the context that those practices emerge from? And we'll go this way again.
So I think in like, firstly, in the context of the initial conversations around Brexit, there was a lot of realization that the people who are going to be the most affected, the most disenfranchised, and also like dealing with the violent aftermath of the Brexit and sort of the ideologies that were coming up at the time were Black and brown, queer and trans people, especially around the UK and also around Europe. So there was like a scramble, kind of like, what are we doing? How do we support each other? How do we look after ourselves? And that was the beginning of a lot of conversations, a lot of planning, a lot of funding applications, trying to figure out how we would have permanent spaces. And I think there was a point where, as a collective, there was like a realization like, oh, this is not going to be possible because everyone's doing so much and also burning out. So there was a redirection into, okay, how do we actually look after ourselves? How do we make sure that we're working within our capacities? How do we make sure that we're checking in on the things that we need as well as the things that everyone needs, and finding the middle ground between us and the work that we're doing to make sure that we're not burning out, or that, you know, we're able to handle conflict, or we're not doing this thing of like performing, the performance of not wellness, but the performance of like, we have so many things to do, so we just have to be okay, so we just have to get it done. It's like, it's okay. It's understandable that we're exhausted, that we're unwell, and a lot of us are experiencing disabilities. And this is all conversations happening before the pandemic. But then the pandemic sort of brought everything to the surface of, well, now that we're still, there's like the loudness of how unwell we are and how under-resourced we are, how much we're doing or how unsustainable this is, which then moved into, okay, we need to have more somatic spaces. We need to be able to come together both virtually and in person where possible to heal together, to be vulnerable, to understand that our vulnerabilities also are part of the liberatory practices that we need to be engaging in. So for me, I think mutual aid and resourcing is a place or like a portal that has opened up as a result of work that has come before us, work that we're doing now. Like that means that we're able to be honest, be vulnerable with what we need, and also ask for that in a way that then we're able to share the load. A lot of virtual, a lot of online spaces that came up as a result of that, which are still happening and going on now, just means that we also then have like a more far-reaching network. And even then, like you won't know. It's like you're saying, like there's so many Black and brown communities who are just doing things. They're not doing it because they want to, like, I don't know, be online sharing these things. But then there's also so many fundraisers that maybe need funding or people who need support. And so being able to find ways of being together in that, like even if it's like WhatsApp groups or weekly breathing sessions, or somebody knowing somebody who can tell them who to go to for conflict resolution, all of it kind of coming together in this like melting pot of support and love and care, and knowing that like at the core of it is a rejection of this like burnout culture that is heavily affecting a lot of us. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question very well.
And I really appreciate what you've said, because, like a lot of the time, these issues that are coming up in our communities are painted as individual problems. And like, as you're saying, like creating those spaces online and like in person of just like, we are together in collectively dealing with these structural issues and like finding ways of resourcing communities. And that is really great. I'm glad that I got it. And yeah, Makeda, what about in Bristol?
Okay. I think in our case, the foundations of the way we're trying to help ourselves as a group is through cooperative economics. We have that as our foundation, and we're taking the lessons of our ancestors who practice similar patterns of support, and we're modernizing it for today's market and today's youth, and trying to provide a foundation which is sustainable, where, 100 years' time, our young people in that area from these backgrounds have a foundation where they're understood, where they're not treated as different because of who they are, Really, when we had, I don't know if many of you know, you might know that we had a Black mayor in Bristol. And that, to us, was our opportunity to engage with politicians, because he was open-minded to ensuring that African people and people of African descent and, BPOC people were well represented, and not just represented politically, but actually had power, had control over their resources, etc., etc. And because we're also part of the reparations movement, to get reparations for the enslavement of Africans, we take a different approach to the way those resources should be obtained. We are not actually going for, grant funding and things like that. We're actually going for reconstituted resources. That means those who have benefited from that trade and have extra because of the exploitation of others who wish to give atonement for that, they actually give it to you to develop in the way you want. And that is the approach we're doing. And it's revolutionary, I think, but it's really exciting people because it's different. And a lot of young people are joining in, and we want to get younger people involved who can be ambassadors. And we're, as I said, the three parts of it are health that we share in the mental and physical health of our people, the education that is involved so that our young people think differently. We talked earlier about the competitive side of things, the way we're right from the start, you're taught that that is the way to be. We have to re-educate our young people to know there is another alternative where all of you can benefit, and the third part is the land. Land is really important. Growing your own food, growing it in a sustainable way, ensuring that you're not caught out as our people are. When there's a crisis, we're always at the margins. Why can't you provide for yourself? That's our self-help model in Bristol.
Thank you. And Nigel, how are you practicing it in Oxford?
Yeah, in Oxford, we're practicing self-help, and by drawing on sort of good examples from other places and also from kind of legacies of self-help. So in terms of examples from places, it's interesting to Makeda talk about Bristol, because sort of one of the ideas that we sort of noticed from Bristol was the Green and Black Alliance. And this is Oxford Community Action. We noticed this in the early stages of us developing Oxford Community Action. Oh, this looks exciting, this initiative in Bristol, the Green and Black Alliance. And we said to some local partner organisations that this initiative is something that perhaps we should be looking at in Oxford in terms of like trying to adapt this initiative in terms of collectively Black and Brown organisations being acknowledged and being centred in work around protecting the environment, around ecological, eco-justice work. And so that inspiration from the local self-help initiatives in Bristol, we kind of tuned into, and we kind of then took that forward in terms of Oxford Community Action, developing the Oxford Eid Extravaganza in 2019, was it, Mujid? 2019. And so the theme of the Oxford Eid Extravaganza, which was curated by Oxford Community Action, Mujid, my colleague, was the lead of that, the lead curator of that, was protecting the environment. I think over 10,000 people attended that event in Oxford. But again, there was a connection. There was a connection to inspiration in terms of what was happening in Bristol. And then for us, another example in terms of legacies of self-help that we draw on is that we, in response to the pandemic, we were kind of, in discussions were happening. People, members of our communities, people that had no recourse to public funds, people that were being put on furlough, a lot of the people that we work with in Oxford Community Action, a lot of our community volunteers, a lot of our community champions are actually people that are working in Oxford. But Oxford, if you know Oxford, it's a very expensive city to live in. It's probably the second most expensive city to live in terms of like rent and housing and mortgages, and also as well, a lot of our people from our Black and Brown communities are working on in precarious, insecure work on 0 hours contracts, not receiving a living wage, and so in terms of the self-help that Oxford Community Action was kind of pushed into, really, is we'd started with a community participatory action research project, which was looking at well-being in Oxford in 2019. And we were developing this project. And then 2020, the pandemic hit. And as a result of the pandemic, people, as I said earlier, that were being put on furlough, people that were sort of like losing their jobs, were bringing to our attention the fact that they weren't able to access the mainstream food banks in the city. And so as a self-help initiative, as a mutual aid initiative, we worked with community members to establish what we call now our food redistribution service. And that was in 2020, started off initially 40 families that were receiving food bags, food parcels. And then at the height of the pandemic, that reached over 450 families that were receiving food parcels. Interesting now, we're sort of like, 2024, and, everybody thinks, okay, we're over the pandemic's finished, crisis is gone. But obviously what the pandemic highlighted was that, the pandemic sort of like exposed those hidden underlying intersecting inequalities that were particularly kind of impacting racialized Black and brown communities. And so what was hidden has been brought to the surface. And so the situation for us as Oxford Community Action in terms of self-help and mutual aid and support is that currently 300 families a week are still receiving food parcels from our food redistribution service. And sort of part of me was kind of like, with that issue, is kind of, I'm a bit uncomfortable with the sort of like the sticking plaster, Band-Aid kind of nature of that as a solution, because it isn't a solution. But then sort of like looking sort of like at the legacies. And so, Noni, because you mentioned the Black Panther Party and the community survival programs, and sort of like, I sort of opened the book that I have at home, sort of like Women in the Black Panther Party. It was just published last year. And it's a sort of photo gallery book that looks at the role of women in the Black Panther Party. And one of the photographs, there's a lot of different photographs, but one of the photographs is of the Black Panther Party in different parts of the States running their free food program. I noted it down there. I noted it before coming in, so I'm so excited that you mentioned the Black Panther Party. So jotted this down just last night, and it's like, obviously the survival programs, the People's Free Food Program, the Free Breakfast for Children's Program, the Free After School Program, the Free Clothing Program. And so all of them community survival programs. And the picture, there's a picture, amazing picture of women from the Black Panther Party filling food redistribution bags. And the photograph, I'm like, oh my God, this makes me think of the OCA food redistribution service. If you come and see our food redistribution service, Gopi's kind of been on many occasions to Chatani to volunteer and support and help out. And it's like that spirit is, we're drawing on that spirit of collective action, self-support, self-mutual aid, is like the picture is like, all these, food parcels, food bags being packaged and distributed. And at the OCA Community Hub, it's like we have just diverse, multi-ethnic, Black and brown community members, week in, week out, sort of supporting each other, helping each other, packaging the parcels, distributing the parcels across the city, different parts of the city. And the parcels are going, as I say, to, people that are working, that, in work poverty, as we call it, So these are people that are working in the so-called the big anchor institutions, Oxford University, Oxford Brookes University, probably working, some people are working as lecturers, but on casualized contracts, so basically lecturers, researchers that are working on 0 hours contracts. These are our Black and brown folk, talented people, skillful people, but sort of not able to draw a living wage. Yeah, these are the people that are doing that work.
I feel like what you've all like kind of highlighted. So I'm taking notes on my phone, so I have to keep on looking. There's a thing of, there's a connection, right, between crisis and, like communities who are exposed to crisis again and again and again. And like it connects to way, way, way in the past. And it's happening now. And, with the way that the current system is organized, it could continue to happen, right? And I feel like what I'm hearing from all of you is like, this legacy of self-help connects people. And it's like it's a craft, basically, and it's like, there's crisis that's happening now, and you're starting from somewhere, because there's all of these examples that are happening in the past. There's examples happening in Bristol. There's examples happening online. So there's an element of that these practices are quite available to us, and we can always try them out. We can experiment with them. And at the end of the day, they end up being lifelines for a lot of our communities. And also, I feel like one of the things that you spoke about is how do we scale that, or how do we practice that? And how do we make it so that we can get really good at just responding to crisis? And I feel like what you were saying, Tobi, of also you're responding to crisis, but then also you're burnt out and you're tired, and you're stressed, and you're trying to meet that collective need when you also need taking care of too. And I'm wondering, there's steps to doing it. So for example, I think one time Makeda was talking to me about how in the past, her mum used to had a partner, which is a collective pot. And, they would collectively save with other women and use that money to meet those community needs. So that's an example of a practice. And what you were saying, Tobi, about how, creating those spaces to breathe in, and spaces to look after our bodies, that's a practice. And doing those community, setting up the food distribution system. So I want to find out more specifically about what is a practice that you go back to quite often, and what are the challenges to doing it? Because I think one of the things when we're coming up with the session, I was economics is something that people could practice. You could leave today and be let me go and, set up a community food redistribution project. Or how can I check in with my neighbors? Or how can I collect £5 from all my friends so that we can, buy food for each other at some point? So, yeah, I would like to start by asking, what is your specific practice that you could share with people, and how you do it? And what have been the challenges to doing that? And what supports you in doing that practice? Maybe I'll start with you, because we talk about partner a lot.
Yeah. I remember that conversation where I talked to you about partner susu, or all the esusu, I think, in Nigeria as well. And
sorry, does anyone not know what partner susu?
It is a rotational savings pattern. So a group of you will come together and save a specific sum per month or per week, and one person gets that pot. It is based on trust. And certainly in the Windrush era, as they call it, when my parents came over here, that was how many of them got their houses and so forth, because they weren't entitled to the typical loans, etc. And it was an old African way of providing for each other in a social setting. Now, that system really depends on trust. So it's got to be with people you know and trust. And I would say from the descriptions my parents give me, people were so honourable in those days. There was a person I knew who I grew up with, and he had a burn on him. And I said to my mum, "Oh, what happened to him?" And she said, "Do you know, he remembered it. He had a fire in his house, and he remembered he had to pay his partner. And he had his wages in his house, and he would run back into his house to get that." I mean, I'm not saying anyone should, but that is the kind of honour. It was so important for him to make sure he met his obligations. Now, we have grown up in a society which makes us very flaky about it. Our politicians don't live up to anything, so we adopt some of these patterns as well. And if we are to reintroduce those things, we've got to start believing in ourselves and believing what we say we do is that important. As you probably know, in many African languages, we don't have those kind of tenses, which mean I may do something. I could, it's either you do or you don't. And we got to be more behind our belief in ourselves that we will and can, and I think just language alone can help in that. So, yeah, we have these older systems. I myself tried to modernize it during lockdown because I could see how much my community was suffering. And I felt that if we could start this again in a more modern way, we could all benefit. And I invented an app where people could save rotationally and also save with family abroad, and put together in a pot for development things, for food, for whatever was needed. And it worked quite well. once you start getting big, you become under regulatory scrutiny because you are dealing with money and you are dealing with certain things you have to do. And getting your app to that standard is quite expensive. And I couldn't really afford to do it. And I didn't want to sell it out to anyone. So I just kept it small, but I did sell some of the technology to other countries. So, for example, in Barbados and in Nigeria, there are people who have licensed the technology so that they can do something smaller with it. But, I'm hopeful that we will adopt some of these systems, look back, the Sankofa images, you're looking back and taking things into the future that you can use for the benefit of the community.
Thank you. I love the tenses.
Yeah.
I feel like
absolutely.
with English is like, oh, could, maybe.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perhaps. Might. Tobi?
When Makeda was speaking earlier about resourcing and repatriation towards reparations, it made me think of what we were doing in Purple Rain at the height of the pandemic was like a lot of like internet calling outs of overprivileged people who had access to resource. And when all the Black Lives Matter and Black squares and all of this were happening, people were like really posting their squares. And it's like, you can't, you can't stop there, hon. Like you have a lot of other work to do. Mm. And so we all tasked ourselves with basically using the white guilt to collect money and putting that money in a pot that we could then share out. And that is still going now. So through that pot, we are able to, any fundraisers that we see online that are for Black, brown, queer or trans people, we've decided on a specific amount. And so we know that at least the money can go as far as it can, because it's not that much money, but as it's still able to go somewhere and support people. So we just donate to any fundraisers that we find that are for Black and brown people, queer and trans people around the world. It was UK specific initially, and then it was like, no, we can't we can't stop there. We have to like try to remember that our connections go beyond the geographical location that we're in. And because of access to the internet, and because you can put money in people's PayPals, it's easy to do that kind of donation. We also then were making care packages for sort of COVID care and PPE, because there was a time when people weren't really having access to the funds or the resource to be able to get the PPE that they needed. So we still share these care packages. They're just free. Like if there are any community events happening, just drop them off there and people can pick them up if they want to. I think obviously it's evident here as well, like masking isn't really as, it's not taken as seriously as it used to be. But yeah, even of 2 years ago, it was something that was still quite appreciated. I think some of these practices, they are sustainable. And they do require a lot of internal organizing and, like you said, a lot of trust, because we're not like a registered organization. We don't have an official bank account. There's no like actual accountability like outside of us just recording what we're doing, how much we're giving, where it's going. So we're the ones who are in charge of our the trust system. Like we're the ones building that system for ourselves. But we're still able to hold the care and the intention as where we're finding our accountability to continue doing that. And it also goes back to the thing of like capacity. A lot of people are like overworking. They don't have that much time. Like they're volunteering in their spare time. They don't want to do funding applications or like be applying to grants or using the language, because not everybody's doing up academic activism. Some people are just like on the ground doing the work that they want to do. So to be able to do it on like a smaller scale, like based on what we have access to and not like overextending ourselves, feels like it makes it more sustainable and is something that can be long term, so people can like drop in and out as they are resourced to. And I think that that's very important to like be able to meet ourselves where we are at, and also know that the energy and the passion and the like motivation to do the work doesn't stop just because we're tired and stuff like this. We can find other ways of still pouring into our communities. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the discussion around partner is really for me, it's really, really interesting because my family's from Jamaica, and sort of like that tradition, partner tradition is very strong in Jamaica. And so I was born in 1964, sort of like, it's showing my age, but 1964 was the year in which the Hornsey Cooperative Credit Union was established, and that was established out of the partner system. And so when we're thinking about sort of like how things are scaled up, that's quite interesting for me to think about. Actually, that tradition that was brought from the Caribbean to the UK, and how then that informal practice was scaled up to the extent that the Hornsey sort of like Cooperative Credit Union of 1964 sort of like was still in existence in 2013, but in a different with a different title, sort of like something like the Capital Credit Union. I can't quite remember. Yeah. So for me, it's quite interesting when we're thinking about how our collective practices can be kind of scaled up. What are the models that we can draw on? And then I think for us as Oxford Community Action, I think a practice that we continue to return to in terms of a collective practice that we draw on, which has become a core activity for Oxford Community Action, is community research, and community research based on participatory action research. And for us, I think that's a practice that that we continue to return to and draw on, because it serves, in terms of the needs of us individually and also collectively in terms of our agency. It's a methodology that sort of like supports individual and collective agency. And so for us, community research in a context where, remember, we're in Oxford University on the left, Oxford Brookes University on the right, and sort of like, the situation at the moment, in Oxford, but sort of like, nationally and globally, we're in a scenario where there's this thing called community university kind of exchanges, knowledge exchange. And so in that context, the knowledge exchange on whose terms, who benefits, whose agenda. And so in that context, for us, community participatory action research in its widest sense is key in terms of being in terms of self-help and self-determination in the context of which I've just highlighted. And so we started our first sort of like, steps into doing participatory research was in 2018. And we developed a project called Men's Health Research Project, and all these community research projects are on our website. So you can find examples of these research projects that we're referring to on our website. So we had a Men's Health Research Project 2018. That came about because we were aware, we saw a report in the Oxford Mail, and the Oxford Mail newspaper said that men in the less affluent part of Oxford had a mortality rate, they were dying 15 years earlier than men in the more wealthy parts of Oxford. And then we realized that, well, actually, the men that they're talking about are Black and brown men. Those are the men that they're talking about, as well as sort of like, white working class men. But Oxford, predominantly in terms of the proportionality, Oxford is about 25, over 29% Black and brown people. It's a relatively high percentage of Black and brown people. And most of those Black and brown people live in less wealthy part of Oxford. So actually, we need to look into this some more. We need to sort of like talk, with our Black and brown men to find out what's going on. Are men accessing NHS health checks? What do men themselves think about their own health and well-being? And so that was the project. That was the community research project. And then that project was actually then taken up by the local authorities, the local NHS public health, and 2018 last year, so Hassan always, our colleague Hassan always, gets him furious about this. He said, look how long it's taken the local health service to respond to the research. So last year, the local authorities, they sort of, they commissioned a new community-based NHS health check service, because essentially sort of like there was low uptake of NHS health checks for Black and brown men. And so as a recommendation from our report was that, those NHS health checks should be community-based, and sort of like they should be in the local churches, in the local mosques, in the local community centres, in local community spaces. And so finally, the local public health service responded to the recommendation and commissioned this new community-based NHS health check service last year. And then in 2022, because again, sort of like the community research is about capacity, because we were talking about capacity. How do we develop capacity within our communities and our organisations? And so the community participatory action research is a great way of developing capacity within our organisations, individual and collective capacity. So it's a practice that we continue to return to because we're developing community researchers. Yeah. And so after the Men's Health Research Project, two of our researchers, Nigel, she's from the Sudanese community, member of Oxford Community Action. She did a research on food and how food is used within the Sudanese community. And Omo is Nigerian. Omo did a community research project looking at Black women's experiences of maternal health in Oxford. That project, Omo's project, Omo made a film with Black and brown women talking about their lived experience of maternal health services in Oxford and what the issues are for them. And again, that project then led to the local NHS midwives working with the communities, working with an organisation that we work in partnership with to develop what they call early years, early lives, kind of more community-based kind of project, midwife community outreach project. So again, and Mujid's here, so I should mention the project that Mujid and Hassan have just completed, which has just gone up on the Health Watch Oxfordshire website yesterday. And this was this is another community research project looking at the impact of the cost of living crisis in relation to people using community food support services. And Mujid's here, so he can tell you about that project. I will say that the project, again, they basically, by doing that project, Mujid and Hassan were doing training as community participatory action researchers with NHS England South East. So NHS England South East region have a whole community participatory action research programme, and you do the training for a year, and then you're qualified as a community participatory action researcher. Hassan and Mujid have done that training. The idea then is that we continue to roll out that training to other community members within Oxford Community Action. So for us, participatory action research is a key practice that we keep returning to, and that we feel we need to do in terms of, for rather than research that's done to, it's about, research that's kind of self-led, but also if we're doing research in partnership with external organisations, we prefer to do research with rather than done to.
I feel like the word that you have all mentioned is self-determination. And I guess when I'm hearing the work that you're all doing, it's an element of how do we protect our communities from interruptions that are happening to us and sort of create that space of looking after each other and creating those models to do that. And secondly, you also all mentioned the idea of informal and like all of these things happening like informally and like through like your neighbors, your community, your like workplace, or like it's systems based on relationships. And in this current like economy, or the way that we understand the economy, is like through institutions or like through businesses and companies. And the idea that, you know, you can have like partner, and it's like we are forming our own kind of bank through our relationship, you know. We are forming our own types of like kitchens through our relationships. I know you, you know me, you know, we're doing like resource like redistribution with the people that we are in community with. And there's an element of like that in how do we scale up the informal nature of this work that is sort of dependent on our relationships. And also like what you were saying about like we're meeting people where they're at, and sort of I expanding the idea of like where economics happen and where the economy is. And I think it's just so brilliant to hear about like the different ways that you're all approaching this. And one of the things that you all spoke about as well is if it is based on relationship, there's an element of like how we're practicing those relationships differently. You mentioned trust. You mentioned like an element of like interdependence, of coming together. And, you know, you were saying about like the community, like research, participatory research, and even like coming together to make decisions about like where the money goes and who to. There's the, I feel like in economics talk, they say it's like governance. But actually, it's just making good decisions with people that sort of like capture everybody's like perspectives and interests as well. And so trust. And I feel like there's something there around like, I was speaking to this like mutual aid organizer who was like, you know, the way that we approach it is like everyone is family, you know. I don't know you, I see you, but like we are practicing the idea of like family and like how I can trust you and how you can trust me, and how like, and I was also one time speaking to my auntie who did a partner, and she was like, someone once stole from us. And I was like, was it bad? She was just like, oh, it just happens, you know. And so I guess like the final question is about the relationships. And for you, how do you see like, because, you know, we've been talking about like how colonialism and capitalism shapes our ways that we interact with each other and the relationships that we have. And so I think this final question before I open up to the audience, how, let me just formulate it in my head, but like what are the necessary like mindset shifts that are required for all of us to be able to practice this in our communities, in our neighborhoods? Like what would you need from someone's like brain space to be able to do this tomorrow? That's the question. Who wants to start?
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. I think the first thing that comes to mind about that, like in response to that question, is a lot to do with being able to meet ourselves first before we're offering ourselves out to other people. So a lot to do with like the safety and knowing that like our healing, our recovery, our wellness is important, and to be able to share that, so that we I don't know what the if it's a word or if it's like the active nature of just arriving as yourself, like, okay, I'm here today, I might be exhausted, but I want to be here and know that I will be held in this space because we've all opted into being here and into doing this work together. I think that helps a lot when it comes to doing work that's like of a collective voice as opposed to just on an individual scale. So that's something that, yeah, it feels like it makes it more sustainable to be able to be in the soma, like in the body, in the action of like, okay, I have 20 minutes left of energy today, but I still want to give it to you. I might not speak, I might just be typing the whole time, but I'm still going to be here. I'll take minutes. So I feel like that's really important, like regardless of how much we want to do, knowing how much we can do in the time. I feel like that's been quite, helpful. Please remind me of the question because it's around.
How are we showing up?
Yeah, how we show up. Yeah. So to prioritize that, it just means that it's easier to then be able to move forward with all the plans, all the dreams, all the like passions, things that we want to do, knowing that we're pacing ourselves as opposed to just like going full throttle and then being like, oh, we didn't finish that now. Like having a year of plans from the beginning and knowing that things are allowed to shift and move and change as the collective is capable of, I think is like super helpful.
Yeah, this is a really tough question in a way. It's a good question, but it is a tough question. Most of the people you'll find in every area who are community-led people who have that mindset, they're overworked. You know, the same volunteers, the same people pop up all the time. And as a result of that, they can get burnout very, very quickly. So there does need to be informal or formal kind of mentorship thing going on where we're bringing in new voices, younger people, people who've just come into the area and want to contribute, bringing them in and training them. We feel that all of us, even in my group, we have development days and periods where because we're operating in an economy with different rules and everything, that can influence you, even though you want to do something else. And so we need days to clear our heads of all that and get back to our beliefs, if you like. And it's impacting all of us because we operate in an economy with different rules. So by giving yourself the space, like you said, to have those days to reset, to say, hey, I think actually we're making a decision here because of this external factor, not really our core beliefs, and being open about that and saying and actually recognizing it and be prepared to challenge and do things differently. Having new people come in who believe in the same things as you do and challenging and keeping yourself honest, if you like, can help. It's not an easy thing. It's not a one size fits all. It's not an easy answer, but by doing some of those things, we feel that we've kept on top of it, but we're not 100% on top of it. We recognize that, as I said, because we're operating in a different system, we have to constantly challenge ourselves and look at the reasons why we're doing things. In our cooperative, we're having educational classes for people to learn a new thing and learn a new way, because we recognize that we've all lost some of it, and we ourselves hold ourselves accountable as well.
I think, this question sort of brings to mind sort of, there's a motto from the Young Historians Project. The motto is each one teach one. And I think so for Oxford Community Action, I think that's an underlying principle, in the sense that, for Oxford Community Action, you have the name Oxford Community Action, but sort of like, what is Oxford Community Action comprised of in terms of like the individual and the collective? And it's comprised of very diverse social networks. And so that, what I mean by diverse social networks is that we work with other community organizations and community associations sort of collectively. But so you might have Oxford Sudanese community in Oxfordshire, Nigerian community Oxford, Swahili speaking community of Oxford, East Timorese. So there are a number of community organizations that are autonomous community organizations, but then also come together collectively under the banner of Oxford Community Action to do collective work. So in one sense, that's one way which we're able to sustain, because we're sustaining in terms of like collective self-support and sort of through interdependency as well, even though we're sort of also recognizing our autonomous kind of selves as well in terms of our respective organizations, and as well sort of like we're intergenerational, and so so we have very senior citizens that are sort of part of Oxford Community Action, that work in Oxford Community Action, that guide and mentor sort of like the younger succeeding generations. And then the younger generations will be saying, you need more young people involved because that's the way that this will sustain. That's how we will sustain this work, by more incorporation and inclusion of us younger people. And so the intergenerational work is so key in terms of to enable us to thrive. Oxford Community Action's banner slogan is, where communities thrive. Where communities thrive is where you have that intergenerational connection. And so, yes, for us, intergenerational, each one, teach one.
Thank you. Wow. I feel like overwhelmed with all these like wonderful contributions. And I feel like the main thing that is like stuck in my head is just the importance of like connection and like working together and like thinking about like past like legacies and how they inform us going forward. With that being said, we'll take 2 questions from the audience. Give you a minute to think. Hey, that's thinking time. Does anyone have a question?
Everyone can hear me though, can't they?
Yeah.
Do I need to put into this for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to ask, and also thank you so much for all of your thoughts on all the work you're doing. I just wanted to ask if you have any like practical experience of, I feel like there's a lot of like young people who really care about stuff and wear it as like an identity or a label, but don't really understand like how to organize, or the necessity of like the kind of the long kind of chipping away nature of it, and the fact that you're not going to get wins all the time, but you have to keep going, and the fact that a lot of the work is like invisible, but you keep going, and this level of like kind of dedication that I feel like is instead, the energy for that is instead being given to like maintaining the identity of the politics rather than the practice of it. And I was just wondering if you have any experience or thoughts on how do we like bring people actively on board, and how do we transform that mindset and kind of build these new generation of organisers?
I think the first thing that came to my mind when you asked the question was around at the beginning of Purple Rain Collective, we were heavily on social media. We were like on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, like sharing, this is what we're doing, or if you're interested, come here and let's do it this way. And it was taking a lot of energy actually from a lot of people who were within the collective to do that work, because a lot of us we're not really social media people. And so at the point when there were maybe like 4 people left in the collective, we just decided that we're not doing any more social media posting, that we would keep the website as up to date as we had capacity for, but then we would focus on just doing the work on the ground, talking to people in person, like speaking to people in like community groups or like in salons or like at the hospital, like this kind of thing, as opposed to just being on social media, knowing that that's not something that we had capacity for. And so for a while, that meant that we didn't have like any like younger people in the space. But then somebody connected us to somebody else who was like very much like a young person who's on social media a lot. And so when we first started like working together, they were like, yeah, why are you not posting on social media? Like this page has been updated since 2017. Like this is ridiculous. Like you're doing so much. And we were like, yeah, it was a collective decision. There's not that many of us now, but that decision was made and there hasn't been any like conversation going back to it there since then. But it's not that we don't want more people in. It's just that we're not doing like the outreach in that way. We're just focusing on what we can do within our capacity. And I could feel their cogs whirring, and they were like really thinking. And the kind of like place where they were like, okay, it's okay, was, okay, I'm going to be in charge of keeping the glossary on the website up to date, if that's okay with you guys. I think like the way that we can continue to make sure that we're engaging our communities is dependent on like what we are doing, like as a group, as an organization, as a collective. But it is very important to keep that space open for different like generations of people to feel like they're welcome, and that the network is allowed to grow as organically as feels feasible. on the like organizational scale. But yeah, I do think about that often, like, oh, if I had capacity, yeah, we'd be sharing on social media all the time, but I don't even share on my own social media. So why am I lying to myself? So yeah, just finding other ways of doing it and keeping up to date feels more important than like the facade of like something happening, when actually it's taking energy away from where we could be directing it in a way that's actually resourcing the people we want to be holding space for.
What?
Do you have anything to add?
Just a little bit to say, I think part of that outreach to younger people to sustain things is through your network. So, for example, at Bristol University, they've now got a school which looks at alternative. You were invited up to Bristol to speak, you know. So those students who take those courses are quite interested in, they're learning it theoretically, but how does it manifest on the ground? And so they are some of the people we're bringing into our way of thinking, trying to push out some of the academic learning so they understand what it actually means, you know. But I think through your network, you can do that. And I think there's a lot of pressure on young people, as we know. Social media could be a force for good and can be a force for bad. So I find a lot of them have good intentions, but as you say, don't always know how to do it. And that's where mentorship and that sort of thing comes in. Yeah.
Very quickly. I think sort of for us sometimes partnering with partner organisations like Young Women's Music Project, Oxford Young Women's Music Project is a great project, and that's sort of like self-organised, self-led by young people. And then as well, sort of, you know, we find that within Oxford Community Action, sort of like young people sort of organising their own events, like sort of sports events, basketball tournaments. They, you know, sort of like young people would just on WhatsApp, social media, would just organise the whole tournament, you know, without sort of like, you know, oldies like myself getting sort of interfering. And a wonderful tournament has been organised, and you think, oh my God, how did this happen? You know? So yeah. So sort of like just providing the resources for young people to self-organise, and again with the Community Bites project that we have, because we have a space in terms of children and young. We have school holiday activities, so we regularly run school holiday activities. And so then that creates the space for young people to have the dialogue, to sort of like come up with their own initiatives and self-organise.
Anu, ask that question quickly.
My question is, what is a hope, a vision, a dream, whatever you want to call it, that keeps you like grounded in your work, rather than necessarily pushing ahead, just more like keeps you coming back or keeps you connected?
I'm going to say, for me, it's like I have this whispering voice from my ancestors, just constantly telling us to reclaim what we had before. And I feel that is my life's work. You know, how many more years I've got here, I don't know, but I have to do that and leave things better, you know, than they were when I came. So for me, it's more of a spiritual thing, not religious at all, but more of a spiritual thing. Yeah.
I think the motivating factor is like, it's not even a dream, it's more a vision that the work is going to continue like long after I'm here. Like people younger than my 10-year-old will be doing this work, you know, like decades from now, and maybe they'll find some of these little blueprints like we have, and it will keep them also going and they can build on it. There was I can't remember if somebody, an elder said, it's great the work that you're doing. There are some ways in which the wheels that have been invented are amazing, and there are some ways in which the wheels are not actually wheels; they're like square bricks just trying to roll. So we need you all to keep sort of sanding down and making it smoother to keep going. So I think for me that's something that sticks in my head a lot, and it feels very like motivational.
So this question, and in terms of, you know, dreaming, but in a way that's grounded, dreaming into the future, but for the, from the present, the future in the present. So I think of an exhibition, a year-long exhibition about the legacy of John La Rose, and the exhibition was titled Dare to Dream. And the Dare to Dream comes from a poem by the Guyanese poet Martin Card, who was a great friend of John La Rose. And in that exhibition, there was kind of like, aspects of the work of John La Rose and the New Beacon Circle. And there's this great quote, which I really keeps me grounded, from John La Rose as part of this Dare to Dream exhibition, where he talks about not slapdash, slow consolidator.
Wow. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Andrew. That was a really good question. And also, thank you so much to our panelists. That was just really great and inspiring. And just like, yeah, thank you so much for all that you've given us today.